I've always been the type of person who's comfortable with the unknown. Growing up in a small town surrounded by vast desert landscapes and endless skis, I learned to appreciate the beauty of the unexplained. As a child, I spent hours poring over books on UFOs, psychic phenomena, and ancient myths. My friends would often tease me for being fascinated by such fringe subjects, but I never let that deter me from exploring the mysteries of the universe. After high school, I pursued a degree in psychology, hoping to understand the human mind's propensity for rationalizing the irrational. Little did I know that my curiosity would one day lead me down a path from which there was no return. I've always been drawn to the desert landscape at night. There's something about the way the stars twinkle above, and the moon casts an ethereal glow on the sand that feels like home. It's where I found solace during my college years, often taking long walks under the stars to clear my mind. That was before the summer of 2017, a season that would change everything. I had just turned 25 and was working as a part-time researcher at a local university. My days were filled with studying and assisting professors with their research projects. It was during one of these late-night stints that I stumbled upon an obscure article about unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, sightings in the American Southwest. The more I read, the more my fascination grew. I became fixated on the idea that there were forces beyond our understanding at work in the world. It was during this period of intense research that I began to feel a sense of restlessness, like something was stirring beneath the surface of my life. It started with small things, strange noises in the night, flickering lights in my apartment, but they quickly escalated into full-blown experiences that left me questioning my own sanity. I knew then that my life was about to take a drastic turn, one that would lead me down a path from which there was no return. It was one of those nights that make you feel small, insignificant even. The sky was a deep shade of indigo, the stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across the fabric of the universe. I had decided to take a break from my research and head out to my favorite spot in the desert, a place where the darkness seemed to swallow everything whole. I packed a small bag with some snacks, water, and my trusty binoculars, feeling a sense of excitement and trepidation as I set out into the unknown. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of creosote bushes and mesquite trees. As I walked, the silence enveloped me like a shroud, punctuated only by the sound of my footsteps on the sand. I felt alive, connected to something deeper than myself. It was as if I was walking on the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss. Suddenly, without warning, my binoculars caught something in their field of view. At first I thought it was just a plane or a bird, but then I saw it, a dark, spherical object hovering above the horizon. My heart skipped a beat as I felt a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins. The object seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, like it was alive and watching me. I stood there, transfixed, as the object began to move closer, its trajectory arcing downwards towards the desert floor. I felt a scream building in my throat, but it was frozen in my chest, unable to escape. The object landed softly on the sand, sending up a plume of dust and debris. As I watched, a figure emerged from the shadow of the sphere, its features indistinct and twisted. My mind recoiled in horror as the figure began to move towards me, its pace slow and deliberate. I tried to run, but my legs were rooted to the spot, unable to move or respond. The figure drew closer, its presence filling my entire field of vision. I felt a wave of panic wash over me, threatening to consume me whole. And then everything went black. I woke up to the sound of my own screams, disoriented and confused. It took me a few moments to realize that I was lying on the sand, surrounded by an endless expanse of darkness. The stars were still visible above me, twinkling like ice chips in a black glass. My mind was foggy, trying to piece together what had happened the night before. I sat up slowly, wincing in pain as my head spun. The memory of the UAP sighting came flooding back, but it felt like a distant dream, something I'd imagined while walking alone in the desert. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just a hallucination brought on by too much time under the sun. But as I stood up and brushed off my clothes, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small, spherical object lay at my feet, partially buried in the sand. It was the same shape and size as the one I'd seen hovering above me the night before. My mind struggled to process what it meant, but my body knew better than to ignore it. Panic set in as I frantically searched my pockets for my phone, wondering if I had somehow managed to record the event on my camera. But when I checked my phone and camera, there was nothing. No footage, no photos, just an empty screen staring back at me like a void. I felt like I'd lost my grip on reality, that the experience had been some kind of prank or hallucination brought on by too much solitude. I tried to convince myself it was all just a product of my overactive imagination, but the image of that dark sphere and its twisted, featureless face lingered in my mind, refusing to be dismissed. As I stood there, frozen with fear, I realized that something fundamental had shifted inside me. The world seemed different now, like the rules of reality no longer applied. And when I finally found myself stumbling back to my apartment, the only thought on my mind was, what else is out there? It was like my mind was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't quite decipher the message. The image of that dark sphere and its twisted face lingered in my mind, refusing to be dismissed. And then, strange things started happening. At first, it was just little things. I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn around and find nothing there. Or I'd see a shadowy figure darting across the street, but when I looked again, it would be gone. But as time went on, the sightings became more frequent and more brazen. I started seeing the dark twin everywhere, in the reflection of my car windshield, in the ripples of a pond, even in the patterns of the trees themselves. It was always just out of reach, but it seemed to be watching me, studying me. I began to feel like I was being stalked by some kind of entity, one that didn't want me to know its presence. The first time I saw my doppelganger up close, I was walking through the park on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was lost in thought, staring at the leaves blowing down the sidewalk, when I noticed a figure standing across from me. At first, I thought it was just another person, but as I looked closer, I realized that it was me, or rather my dark twin. It was dressed in the same clothes as me, wore the same haircut, and had the same piercing blue eyes. But there was something off about it, something that didn't quite add up. The skin was paler, the eyes seemed darker, and the smile was twisted and cruel. I felt a chill run down my spine as our eyes met, and for a moment we just stared at each other. It was like we were locked in some kind of silent understanding, one that neither of us could quite explain. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the dark twin vanished into thin air. I stood there, frozen, wondering if I'd really seen what I thought I'd seen. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A piece of paper on the ground, with a message scrawled across it in red ink. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I walked home from the park that day, I couldn't help but feel like I was being stalked. Every step felt like a betrayal, every breath like a signal that I was being monitored. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest until I reached the safety of my apartment building. But even as I stepped inside, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. It was like a shadow had followed me home, lurking just out of sight. I tried to distract myself with TV and books, but nothing seemed to work. The more I read or watched, the more my mind wandered back to those dark twin sightings. And then there were the messages. They started appearing on my doorstep, in my mailbox, even on my phone. Always in red ink, always with the same ominous message. "We're watching you." At first, I thought it was just some kind of prankster, but as the days went by, I realized that something more sinister was at play. The messages were always different, always hinting at something deeper. But one thing remained constant: the feeling of being watched. I started to vary my routine, trying to shake off the sense of unease. I changed my daily route, took different routes to work, even started wearing a mask in public. But no matter what I did, the feeling persisted. It was like I was trapped in some kind of waking nightmare, with no escape from the terror that lurked around every corner. And then, one night, I received a message that made my blood run cold. "We're not just watching you, Omar. We're waiting for you." I knew I had to find out more about these sightings. I started researching similar incidents, looking for patterns and connections. At first, it was tough to find anything concrete. But as I dug deeper, I stumbled upon some interesting cases. There were reports of UFO sightings in the desert, similar to my own experience. And then there were the disappearances, people who had gone out into the woods or desert and never come back. It was like something was out there, watching and waiting. I also found some online forums where people were sharing their own experiences with UAPs. They described similar sightings, but with different twists. Some said they saw strange lights in the sky, while others reported seeing humanoid figures lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I spent hours poring over these accounts, looking for any clues that might explain what was happening. And then, one night, I stumbled upon a video that made my blood run cold. It was an old footage of a UAP sighting, taken by a group of hikers in the desert. As I watched, I saw something that looked like a dark twin, just like mine. But this time, it was different. This time, it seemed to be interacting with the environment around it, as if it were made of some kind of energy or light. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this might be what I was dealing with. Was it possible that these sightings were connected? That there was something out there, watching and waiting, and it was trying to communicate with us? The more I learned, the more I realized how little I knew, and that made me even more determined to uncover the truth. I was skeptical at first, but as I listened to their story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity. They had encountered the dark twin in the same park where I had seen mine, and they described its behavior and appearance with eerie precision. "It's like it's watching us, waiting for something," they said, their eyes wide with concern. "I know exactly what you're talking about." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this stranger might be more than just a curious observer. They claimed to have been researching the phenomenon for months and had stumbled upon some fascinating connections between the sightings. "It's not just a matter of seeing something in the distance," they said. "These dark twins are interacting with us, trying to communicate." I was intrigued, despite my initial reservations. There was something about this stranger that seemed familiar. Like we had met before but couldn't quite remember where or when. As we talked, I started to feel a sense of ease with them that I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was like we were speaking the same language, one that only a handful of people could understand. "What do you think is going on?" they asked, their eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I think it's more than just a simple sighting," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I think it's something bigger. They nodded, as if they had been expecting me to say that. I've been thinking the same thing, they said, a small smile playing on their lips. And in that moment, I knew that I was not alone. There were others out there who understood what I was going through and who were determined to uncover the truth. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I started to notice strange inconsistencies in my stranger's story. At first, it was small things, a discrepancy in their account of where they saw the dark twin, or a vague detail that didn't quite add up. But as I pressed them for more information, I realized that their entire narrative was built on shaky ground. They claimed to have been researching the phenomenon for months, but when I asked to see their notes or documentation, they became evasive and defensive. They said they had been following a trail of clues that led them deeper into the mystery, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something from me. As the days went by, I found myself becoming increasingly paranoid and isolated. My stranger friends seemed to be watching me more closely than ever, their eyes narrowing slightly whenever I tried to pry more information out of them. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake in trusting them, if they were somehow manipulating me for their own purposes. One night, I decided to do some digging on my own. I snuck out of the house and followed my stranger friend to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I watched from across the street as they entered the building, their movements swift and purposeful. I waited for a few minutes, then crept inside to see what I could find. The warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. My stranger friend moved swiftly through the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dark as they examined various contraptions and devices. I watched in fascination as they worked, my mind racing with questions and doubts. But as I watched, I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. Something didn't feel right. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Suddenly, I knew that I had to get out of there fast. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back in the safety of my own home. As I caught my breath, I realized that I had stumbled upon something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. Something that threatened to upend everything I thought I knew about reality itself. And yet, despite my growing unease, I couldn't shake the feeling that my stranger friend was still watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. The game had only just begun, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. I couldn't shake the feeling that my stranger friend was hiding something from me. I started to notice tiny inconsistencies in their story, small discrepancies that added up to a bigger problem. It dawned on me that they might be manipulating me, using me to further their own agenda. I felt a growing sense of paranoia as I wondered if everything they told me was true. Were they who they claimed to be? Was this whole thing just some elaborate ruse? I began to doubt my own perceptions, wondering if I was seeing things that weren't really there. One day, I decided to confront them about my concerns. "Tell me the truth," I said, my voice firm but trembling with uncertainty. "What's going on here?" They looked at me with a mixture of surprise and annoyance, as if they had expected this moment sooner. "You're starting to see things, aren't you?" they said, their tone laced with condescension. "You're beginning to doubt your own sanity." I felt a surge of anger, but I bit back my response, trying to keep the conversation civil. "I'm just trying to understand," I said, my voice measured. "I want to know what's really going on here." They sighed, their expression softening slightly. "You're looking for answers in all the wrong places," they said, their words dripping with sorrow. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Suddenly, the lights flickered and the room plunged into darkness. When they came back on, my stranger friend was gone. I was left standing alone, surrounded by an oppressive silence. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving me with more questions than ever before. Had I just imagined the whole thing, or had something truly sinister taken place in that warehouse? I had been left standing alone in the warehouse, my mind reeling with questions and doubts. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. On the wall opposite me, a message was scrawled in red paint. "Look again." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this was no ordinary graffiti. It was as if someone or something had been trying to communicate with me. As I pondered the meaning of the message, I began to experience strange synchronicities. Every time I looked at my phone, I saw a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at 5 p.m. At first, I thought it was just a prank, but then I noticed that every clock in the room seemed to be ticking away at exactly the same pace. It was as if we were somehow synchronized, like two dancers moving to the same beat. My stranger friend reappeared, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. "You're starting to see," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. "You're starting to understand." I felt a surge of excitement mixed with fear as I realized that I was being drawn into a world beyond my wildest imagination. My stranger friend took me on a wild goose chase through the city, pointing out strange coincidences and synchronicities at every turn. We watched as two people walked down the street together, their footsteps perfectly in sync. We saw a car drive by with license plate number 666. Every step of the way, my stranger friend seemed to be leading me deeper into a world where the laws of physics no longer applied. It was as if we were living in a dream that was rapidly becoming more and more surreal. And yet, despite the strangeness of it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow connected to my own destiny. My stranger friend seemed to know me better than anyone, their eyes holding a deep understanding that went beyond words. I followed my stranger friend through the winding streets of the city, our footsteps echoing off the buildings. We finally arrived at a small, unassuming door hidden behind a dumpster. My friend produced a key and unlocked the door, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. "This is it," they said, their voice low and mysterious. "The heart of the mystery." I hesitated for a moment, feeling a thrill of fear mixed with excitement. But my stranger friend took my hand and pulled me down the stairs, leading me deeper into the depths of the earth. At the bottom of the staircase, we found ourselves in a vast underground chamber filled with rows of ancient stone sarcophagi. My friend led me to the center of the room, where a single sarcophagus was adorned with strange symbols and markings. "This is it," they said again, their voice barely above a whisper. "The resting place of the Dark Twin." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this was the source of the mystery, the key to understanding the strange occurrences that had been plaguing me. My stranger friend lifted the lid of the sarcophagus, revealing a figure wrapped in black cloth. As we approached, the figure slowly began to stir, its eyes snapping open with an otherworldly intensity. "Welcome," it said, its voice like a cold wind. "I have been waiting for you." I felt a wave of fear wash over me as I realized that this was no ordinary being. It was something ancient and evil, something that had been awakened by my own presence in the world. My stranger friend stepped forward, their eyes locked on the figure in the sarcophagus. "You have been searching for answers," they said, their voice firm but cautious. "But do you know what you are looking for?" The Dark Twin regarded us calmly, its eyes seeming to bore into our very souls. "I am the shadow that follows," it said, "the darkness that lurks within every heart." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the true nature of this being. It was not just a monster, but a symbol of the deepest fears and desires that lay within us all. And yet, despite the terror that it inspired, I couldn't help but feel a sense of fascination with this creature. It was as if I had stumbled into a hidden world, one that existed just beyond the edge of our everyday reality. My stranger friend stepped forward, their eyes locked on the dark twin. "We have come to understand you," they said, their voice steady and calm. "And we have come to accept you." The dark twin regarded us for a moment, its eyes seeming to weigh our words. Then, with a sudden movement, it rose from the sarcophagus, its black cloth wrapping around it like a shroud. "I will follow you," it said, its voice low and menacing. "Into the light and into the darkness." I felt a surge of fear as I realized that this was not an offer to be taken lightly. But my stranger friends smiled, their eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "We have been waiting for you," they said. As I followed my stranger friend and the dark twin, I felt myself being pulled down a rabbit hole of madness. Every step we took brought us deeper into a world where reality was distorted, and the laws of physics no longer applied. The air grew thick with an otherworldly energy that seemed to seep into my very bones. I tried to cling to what was familiar, but it was like grasping at sand. The harder I held on, the more it slipped through my fingers. My stranger friend led me through a series of surreal landscapes, each one more bizarre than the last. We walked on water, and the sky turned a deep shade of purple. The trees seemed to twist and writhe like living serpents, their branches reaching out to snatch at my clothes. I felt my grip on reality begin to slip, like a thread pulled loose from a sweater. Every step brought me closer to the edge of sanity, and yet I couldn't look away. The dark twin walked beside us, its presence a constant reminder that we were not alone in this twisted world. It seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake so it could pounce. My stranger friends smiled at me, their eyes glinting with a mischievous light. "We're getting close," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. "The truth is just around the corner." I felt a surge of fear mixed with excitement. What was the truth? And what did it have to do with my grip on reality? As we walked, the world around me began to distort and blur. The colors became more vivid, the shapes more twisted. I felt like I was trapped in a dream from which I couldn't wake up. My stranger friend stopped suddenly, their eyes fixed on something in front of us. "Look," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. I followed their gaze, and what I saw took my breath away. In front of us lay a city made entirely of mirrors. The buildings seemed to stretch on forever, each one reflecting the image of the last. I felt like I was staring into an infinite corridor of glass with no end in sight. My stranger friends smiled at me, their eyes gleaming with excitement. "Welcome to the world of reflections," they said. "Here, reality is just a reflection." I felt my mind reel as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. Was this some kind of trick, a clever illusion designed to confuse and disorient? Or was it something more? As I stood there, frozen in confusion, the dark twin spoke up for the first time. "You will never leave this place," it said, its voice like a cold wind. "You will be trapped here forever, staring into the mirror of your own mind." I felt a surge of fear mixed with determination. I would not be trapped. I would find a way out of this twisted world and back to reality. But as I turned to face my stranger friend, I saw something that made my blood run cold. They were no longer smiling. Their eyes had changed, their expression now one of cold calculation. "I'm afraid you're wrong," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "You will never leave this place."